I said bring her to me. Now. Ethan Caldwell did not raise his voice, but the ballroom still went silent as if someone had cut the music with a knife. 400 guests turned toward the service entrance of the Sterling Children's Gala, where Maya Brooks stood with a silver tray balanced on one hand and 12 untouched champagne flutes catching the gold light above her. For 3 hours, she had moved quietly through that room, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling when people looked through her, and stepping aside when women in silk gowns brushed past her like she was part of the wallpaper. She had been careful, perfect even. Her black uniform was pressed, her name tag straight, her braids pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. But perfection did not protect people like Maya in rooms built for people like Ethan Caldwell. He stood on the raised stage beneath a chandelier the size of a small car, one hand resting on the podium, the other pointing directly at her. Behind him, a giant screen glowed with the words, "Every child deserves a future," while beneath it, a billionaire CEO treated a working woman like she did not deserve a moment of dignity. No one laughed. Not yet. The silence was worse than laughter. It had weight. It pressed against Maya's shoulders, wrapped around her throat, and filled the space between her heartbeat and the next step she knew she had to take. Claire Donovan, the gala's communications director, leaned toward Ethan and whispered something fast, her face tight with panic. Ethan did not even look at her. He kept his eyes on Maya, cold and polished, the way men like him looked at problems they were used to paying someone else to remove. "Bring her here," he repeated, slower this time, letting every donor, every reporter, every board member hear him. If a mistake embarrasses this foundation, then the person responsible should have the courage to stand in front of the people she embarrassed. A murmur traveled through the ballroom. Someone lowered a fork. Someone else lifted a phone. Maya felt the eyes before she saw them, dozens first, then hundreds, turning her from a waitress into a spectacle. The strange thing was, she was not afraid of the stage. She had stood in harder places than this. Hospital billing offices with her mother's paperwork in her hands. Community college financial aid lines that wrapped around the building. Apartment kitchens at 2 a.m., counting tips under a flickering light while her younger brother slept in the next room. No, the stage did not scare her. What scared her was how familiar the moment felt. A powerful man needed someone small enough to blame, and the room was waiting to see if she would shrink. Maya set the tray down on the nearest service table with both hands. Not quickly, not nervously, carefully. The tiny sound of glass touching linen seemed louder than the orchestra had been. Then she walked forward, step by step, across the marble floor, past the tables dressed in white roses and gold-rimmed plates, past donors who had written checks for children they would never meet, yet could not bring themselves to look kindly at the black woman walking between them. Ethan watched her approach with a thin smile, already certain he owned the moment. He owned the podium. He owned the microphone. He owned the room, or so he believed. Maya reached the edge of the stage and looked up at him, her face calm, her hands empty, her voice still and used. And that was the first thing Ethan Caldwell failed to understand. Empty hands do not mean a person has nothing. Sometimes they mean she has been carrying the truth too long. The steps to the stage felt longer than the entire night Maya had already worked. Every heel strike against the marble floor sounded too clean, too public, too final. She could feel the ballroom dividing itself around her, not with words, but with glances. Some faces carried pity, the soft, useless kind people offer when they want to feel decent without getting involved. Some looked annoyed, as if her humiliation had interrupted the rhythm of their 7-course dinner. Others watched with the bright curiosity of people who sensed that something uncomfortable was about to become entertainment. The Sterling Children's Gala had been designed to feel holy in the language of wealth. White roses climbed the columns. Gold ribbons circled every chair. Crystal bowls held floating candles on each table, their flames trembling like tiny witnesses. At the far end of the ballroom, a jazz trio had been playing beneath a velvet balcony, but now their instruments rested in their laps, silent and uncertain. Above everything, the giant screen still displayed smiling children in backpacks, playgrounds painted in bright colors, and the promise that generosity could change a life. Maya knew that promise better than anyone in the room. She had once been one of those children, standing in a school hallway in Atlanta with shoes half a size too small, holding a scholarship letter that made her mother cry into both hands. That scholarship had paid for books, bus passes, science camps, and the first laptop Maya ever owned. It had not made her life easy, but it had opened one door. Sometimes one door was enough to keep a child from believing the whole world was locked. That was why this gala mattered to her, even if no one knew it. Not the guests who asked for sparkling water without looking up. Not the women who called her sweetheart as though the word was a tip. Not the men who spoke over her shoulder to find a manager before she had even finished answering. They saw a uniform. They saw brown hands around a tray. They saw service, not history. Maya reached the bottom step of the stage and paused. Ethan Caldwell looked down at her from behind the podium, his white dress shirt glowing under the stage lights, his silver cuff links flashing each time he adjusted his sleeve. He looked like a man built by magazines. Tall, composed, expensive, untouched by the ordinary weather of life. At 43, he had the smooth confidence of someone who had never had to explain why he belonged in a room. Caldwell Meridian Group owned apartment towers, medical technology startups, private schools, luxury hotels, and a dozen smaller companies hidden behind cleaner names. Ethan did not just buy businesses. He bought narratives. Tonight, he had purchased one about compassion. The photographers near the press riser had captured him shaking hands with teachers, kneeling beside children for posed pictures, and smiling beneath banners that praised opportunity. But now the mask had slipped just enough for Maya to see the machinery behind it. Claire Donovan stood 2 steps behind him, still trying to rescue the evening with her eyes. Margaret Wells, the foundation chair, sat at the front table with her fingers pressed against her pearl necklace, her face pale with recognition Maya could not yet understand. The room waited. Ethan extended the microphone toward Maya with a smile that was almost polite. Almost. He expected her to apologize. He expected her voice to shake. He expected obedience dressed up as accountability. Maya looked at the microphone, then at the screen behind him, where numbers began to cycle beneath the smiling children. Pledges, programs, administrative growth, future expansion. Her eyes stopped on one line, and something inside her went still. Not scared still. Not broken still. The kind of stillness that comes when a person recognizes a lie wearing formal clothes. Maya had learned to read numbers before she learned to trust people with them. Numbers did not smile while hiding contempt. Numbers did not call you sweetheart and forget your name. Numbers either balanced or they did not, and the line glowing behind Ethan Caldwell did not balance. Brooks Future Scholars, the program named after her mother, was listed under administrative restructuring with a projected reduction of $12 million. The words were soft. The damage was not. Maya stared at the screen while the entire ballroom waited for her to perform the role Ethan had written for her. A small apology, a bowed head, a quiet return to the kitchen. That was the ending he expected because that was the ending men like him were used to getting. He held the microphone a little closer to her mouth. His smile sharpened. "Go ahead, Miss Brooks," he said, reading her name tag as if he had just discovered she had won. "Tell the donors what happened tonight." The room leaned in. Maya lifted her eyes from the screen to his face. For 1 second, she saw not a monster, not a villain, but a man so protected by wealth that he had mistaken comfort for wisdom. That almost made it worse. "What happened tonight," Maya said softly, "started long before I carried a tray into this room." The microphone caught every word. The speakers carried her voice across the ballroom, clean and steady. A few heads tilted. Claire Donovan froze. Ethan blinked once, the first crack in his polished expression. "Excuse me," he said. Maya turned slightly, not toward him, but toward the audience. 3 months ago, I submitted a discrepancy report to the foundation office. It concerned Brooks Future Scholars, the early education fund connected to this gala. A ripple moved through the tables like wind through dry leaves. Margaret Wells sat forward. Julian Pierce, the foundation attorney, lowered his wine glass without drinking from it. Ethan let out a quiet laugh, meant to put the room back under his control. "This is not the place for confusion," he said. "You are here because you made a service error." Maya looked at him then, fully. "No, sir. I am here because you asked me to stand here." That sentence did not land loudly. It landed deeply. Phones rose higher. The photographers stopped pretending not to listen. Ethan's jaw tightened, but Maya kept her voice even. She had spent years learning that calm could be louder than anger when the truth was strong enough. "The number on that screen is wrong," she said. "Brooks Future Scholars was approved for $28 million this fiscal year. Tonight, it is listed as $16 million under active programming, with the remaining $12 million moved into administrative expansion. But the expansion account was created only 6 weeks ago, and it is connected to a vendor that does not appear in last year's public filings." The ballroom changed temperature. It was not visible, exactly, but everyone felt it. The warmth of charity began to drain from the gold walls. Ethan's smile vanished. Claire brought a hand to her mouth. Somewhere near the back, a waiter whispered, "Oh, my goodness." Maya heard it, but she did not stop. She could not stop now. Not because she wanted revenge. Because some child somewhere was still waiting for the door her mother once helped build. Ethan reached for the microphone, but Maya did not pull away. She simply held it with both hands and continued. "I was not the only person who saw it. I sent the report with source documents, transfer dates, and account codes. I never received a reply." Margaret Wells stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. That small sound cut through the room harder than a shout. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Check the archive. Check it now." Ethan turned toward her with a look that tried to become command and failed halfway there. "Margaret, this is unnecessary." She did not sit down. For the first time that night, the power in the room shifted away from the man on the stage and toward the woman he had tried to shame beneath it. Maya lowered the microphone an inch, her heart beating fast, but her face still calm. Ethan Caldwell had demanded her in front of everyone. Now everyone was listening. Julian Pierce did not move like a man rushing to save a party. He moved like a man realizing a locked door had just opened behind him. He stood from the front table, pulled a thin tablet from his leather case, and began searching with the tense focus of someone who knew that silence could become evidence. Around him, the sterling ballroom held its breath. The white roses still climbed the columns. The candles still trembled in their crystal bowls. The children on the screen still smiled in their bright stock photos, unaware that their names had become the center of a storm dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. Ethan Caldwell stepped away from the podium, one hand raised in a gesture meant to soothe the room, but nothing about his face was soothing anymore. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth enough to pass for calm if no one looked at his eyes. "This is clearly a misunderstanding from someone who does not understand the complexity of foundation accounting." There it was. Not an apology. Not a question. A cage built out of polite words. Maya felt it close around her, the old familiar shape of dismissal. Someone who does not understand. Someone like her. A waitress with tired feet. A black woman in a service uniform. A person who was supposed to carry plates, not numbers. But this time the cage did not hold. Margaret Wells turned sharply toward Ethan. "Let him check." Ethan's smile returned, thinner now, stretched over irritation. "Margaret, with respect, we are in the middle of a public fundraising event." "Then perhaps," Margaret said, "we should be grateful the public is here." A soft sound moved through the crowd. Not applause, not agreement, but recognition. The room had heard the shift. Ethan had heard it too. For the first time all night, he was not setting the tone. Maya stood near the stage steps with the microphone lowered against her waist, her fingers wrapped around it, but not gripping. She could feel her pulse in her palms. She wanted to think of her mother, but the memory came before she could choose it. Denise Brooks at the kitchen table, wearing reading glasses from the dollar store, circling scholarship forms with a blue pen. Denise Brooks saying, "Money is not just money, baby. In the right hands, it is a bridge. In the wrong hands, it is a wall." Maya had been 13 when she first heard that. She had not understood it then. She understood it now under a chandelier worth more than her yearly rent. Julian looked up from the tablet. His face had changed. The color had drained from it, leaving only the hard professional stillness of a lawyer discovering that the problem was not theoretical. "There is an email," he said. Ethan turned slowly. "From whom?" Julian looked at Maya, then back at the screen in his hands. "From Maya Brooks. Sent 92 days ago to the Foundation compliance address, with attachments." The room exhaled all at once. Phones lifted higher. Claire Donovan whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer and a crisis statement at the same time. Ethan's voice dropped. "That inbox receives hundreds of unverified messages." "This one was not unverified," Julian said. "It included internal ledger screenshots, transfer codes, and a vendor registration trail. Maya closed her eyes for half a second, not in victory, in relief. For months, she had wondered if the report had disappeared into the same place poor people's concerns often disappeared, somewhere between inconvenience and neglect. Now it had a timestamp. It had attachments. It had her name. Ethan looked toward the donors, searching for loyalty, but wealth has a strange kind of courage when cameras are recording. People who had laughed at his jokes 10 minutes earlier now stared down at their plates or across at the attorney. One board member removed his glasses. Another stood and quietly walked toward Julian. The room was no longer a gala. It was a witness stand. Margaret took one step toward Maya, her eyes shining with something that looked painfully close to shame. "Miss Brooks," she said, "why did you not come to me directly?" Maya lifted the microphone again, slowly enough that no one could call it defiance, clearly enough that no one could mistake it for fear. "Because people like me learn early," she said, "that the truth has to be perfect before it is believed." No one spoke. Not Ethan. Not Margaret. Not the guests who had paid $10,000 a seat to feel generous for one evening. Above them, the screen kept glowing, but the words, "Every child deserves a future," no longer felt like a slogan. They felt like a question. And for the first time that night, the person expected to answer was not the waitress. The question in the room changed shape so quickly that even Ethan Caldwell seemed unsure where to stand. A few minutes earlier, he had been the center of gravity, the man beneath the lights, the billionaire whose name sat in gold lettering on the invitation, the donor every camera wanted to frame. Now the cameras had shifted. They were not chasing his smile anymore. They were following Julian Pierce as he connected his tablet to the ballroom display, following Margaret Wells as she stepped away from the front table, following Maya Brooks as she stood with a microphone in one hand and the calm of a woman who had run out of reasons to disappear. Julian hesitated near the control panel. "Margaret," he said quietly, though the nearest microphone still caught him, "are you certain?" Margaret looked toward the giant screen, then toward the photographs of children taped along the side wall, each one holding a handwritten card that said what they wanted to be when they grew up. Doctor, teacher, engineer, artist. She swallowed hard. "Put it up." Ethan moved fast, not with panic, but with the polished urgency of a man trying to make panic look like procedure. "This is confidential foundation material," he said. "Displaying internal documents at a live event would be reckless." Maya looked at him. So was moving $12 million away from children who never got to vote on it. The sentence struck the room cleanly. No one gasped. No one needed to. Some truths do not explode. They settle. They land in the center of a room and make every expensive thing around them look smaller. Julian tapped the screen. The gala presentation vanished. The smiling children disappeared. In their place came a chain of documents, transfer summaries, vendor names, dates, approval codes, and the compliance email Maya had sent 92 days earlier. At the top was her name, plain and undeniable. Maya Brooks. The same name Ethan had read from a plastic tag, as if it were evidence of her insignificance. Claire Donovan stepped closer to the screen, her professional face crumbling into something more human. "I never saw this," she whispered. Julian nodded once. "It was routed away from the main compliance queue after receipt." "By whom?" Margaret asked. The room tightened. Ethan's expression did not change much, but his stillness became too deliberate. He stared at the screen as if he could command the letters to rearrange themselves. Julian enlarged the routing history. For a moment, the cursor blinked on the wall like a heartbeat. Then the name appeared. Caldwell Executive Review. The ballroom went silent in a way silence had not been silent before. Earlier, silence had been curiosity, then discomfort. Now it was judgment. Ethan reached for the podium, not because he needed support, but because men who live by control often need something solid when control begins to leave them. "Executive review is a standard filter," he said. "It does not imply wrongdoing." Maya nodded slowly, and that small nod unsettled him more than an argument would have. "You are right," she said. "It does not imply wrongdoing. That is why I included the vendor trail." Julian clicked again. A company profile appeared, Northline Civic Strategies. Clean logo, clean language, clean lies. The vendor had been registered 6 weeks earlier, just as Maya had said. Its listed office address was a suite in Delaware. Its managing partner was hidden behind layers of filings. But Julian had pulled enough for the first thread to show. Margaret read the name on the screen and covered her mouth. One donor stood. Another pushed his chair back. Ethan turned away from the audience, and in that movement, Maya saw it. Not guilt exactly. Not fear exactly. Recognition. He knew the name. Maybe he had not moved the money himself. Maybe he had signed what someone placed in front of him. Maybe he had trusted the wrong people because the wrong people wore the right suits. But he had ignored the warning. He had ignored her. And now that neglect had a cost, Margaret faced him with tears bright in her eyes, but her voice did not break. Ethan, did you know? For the first time all evening, Ethan Caldwell did not answer immediately. The man who could demand a waitress across a ballroom could not find one sentence strong enough to save himself. Maya lowered the microphone, not to surrender, but because the truth no longer needed her to carry it alone. For several seconds, Ethan Caldwell stood beneath his own name and said nothing. That silence told the room more than his answer ever could. It traveled from table to table, past the donors with their $10,000 plates, past the reporters pretending not to record, past the staff standing half-hidden near the service doors, and settled at Maya's feet like proof. Margaret Wells did not look away from him. Ethan, she said again, softer this time, and somehow that made it worse. Did you know? Ethan inhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, as if breathing carefully could rebuild the empire cracking around him. I knew there were structural changes, he said. I did not know the program would be affected at this level. Julian Pierce looked down at the tablet. The approval packet references the reduction 3 separate times. Ethan's eyes flashed toward him. Not anger, not exactly. Warning. But warning had lost its currency in that ballroom. Julian did not lower his gaze. It also includes a summary of Miss Brooks's concern attached to the review file. Claire Donovan turned toward Ethan as if seeing him under different lighting. You read her report? Ethan's jaw tightened. I read hundreds of reports. That was not the question, Maya said. Her voice was quiet, but the speakers still carried it. Ethan looked back at her then, and for the first time, he did not look like a man addressing staff. He looked like a man facing the person he had misjudged in public and could no longer reduce in private. Maya took one step closer to the stage, not climbing it, not joining him beneath the lights, but close enough that the room understood she did not need his platform to have power. My mother helped build Brooks Future Scholars before it had a donor wall, before it had a gala, before anyone wore diamonds to talk about poor children. Her words moved slowly, each one placed with care. She worked in school cafeterias, church basements, libraries, anywhere families would listen. She believed children did not need pity. They needed access. Margaret's face crumpled with recognition. Denise Brooks, she whispered. Maya nodded once. She used to say a bridge is not charity if you build it only for people who look like you. The ballroom went still again, but this time the silence felt different. It was no longer waiting for scandal. It was listening to memory. On the wall, the vendor documents remained frozen above Ethan's shoulder, cold and technical, but Maya had brought warmth back into the truth. She had put a mother's name where a budget line had been. She had put children's faces where a corporation had placed language. Ethan looked toward the photographs along the side wall, the children holding their dream cards, and something in his expression shifted. It was small, too late maybe, but real enough for the cameras to catch. Miss Brooks, he began. Maya raised one hand. Not rude, not dramatic, simply enough to stop him. Please do not apologize to me yet, she said. Apologize after the money is returned. Apologize after the children are protected. Apologize after you understand that the person carrying your glass may also be the person who read the document you were too important to notice. No one breathed. Then, from the back of the room, one of the kitchen servers began to clap once, then stopped, scared of himself. A donor at table 12 joined. Then another. The sound spread, uneven at first, then stronger, not celebration, not entertainment, but agreement. Ethan did not move. He had demanded a public lesson from a waitress. Instead, the room had watched her teach one. The applause did not save the evening. It exposed it. It rolled across the sterling ballroom like a verdict no one had planned to deliver, bouncing off the gold ceiling, the marble columns, the donor plaques, and the polished faces of people who had arrived expecting inspiration and found accountability instead. Maya stood still while the sound grew around her. She did not smile. She did not bow. She did not raise her hands like a winner because this was not victory to her. Victory would have been the $12 million never leaving the children in the first place. Victory would have been her email answered before a ballroom, had to watch a billionaire learn humility under camera lights. Ethan Caldwell remained by the podium, his face unreadable, but his hand had tightened around the edge of the wood. The applause was not loud enough to embarrass him the way he had tried to embarrass Maya, but it was steady enough to remind him that the room no longer belonged to him. Margaret Wells turned to Julian Pierce with the sharp clarity of a woman who had just found the fire alarm in a burning building. "Freeze all pending transfers connected to Northline Civic Strategies," she said. "Tonight." Julian nodded. "I will contact the bank and the outside auditors immediately." A board member at table 6 stood up. "The donor committee should suspend authorization authority until the review is complete." Another donor, a retired school superintendent from Chicago, rose beside him. "And the scholarship fund needs emergency protection. Not next quarter. Now." The words came one by one, then all at once, until the gala became something it had never been meant to become: useful. Claire Donovan stepped away from Ethan and moved toward the press riser, her phone already against her ear, her voice low and urgent as she began turning a public disaster into a public record. At the service doors, the staff watched with wide eyes. Some of them had known Maya only as the quiet one who traded shifts, covered late tables, and kept extra granola bars in her locker for anyone who missed dinner. Now they saw her standing in the center of the room, not changed, but revealed. Ethan finally lifted the microphone from the podium. "Everyone," he said, and the applause thinned into wary silence. His voice carried the old polish, but not the old power. "I understand the concern. I am prepared to personally guarantee the missing amount until the audit is complete." A few people murmured. It sounded generous. It was meant to sound generous. But Maya knew the difference between restoration and control. So did Margaret. "That will not be necessary as a condition of silence," Margaret said. Ethan turned toward her. "That is not what I meant." "Then make sure it is not what happens." The sentence landed clean. Ethan looked at Maya, and for the first time that night, there was no command in his eyes. Only the beginning of comprehension, painful and late. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I should not have called you up here the way I did." Maya held his gaze. The ballroom leaned into that small exchange as if it mattered more than every pledge card on every table. "No," she said. "You should not have." He swallowed. "And I should have read what you sent." "Yes," Maya said. "You should have." There was no cruelty in her answer. That made it harder to dismiss. She was not performing forgiveness for the comfort of people who had watched her be humiliated. She was telling the truth with the same calm she had used from the beginning. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, not long enough to erase what he had done, but long enough to show that it had finally reached him. Near the side wall, one of the children from the foundation video stood with his mother, both invited earlier for a brief photo opportunity. He held a small cardboard sign that read "Engineer" in blue marker. Maya saw him watching her. Not Ethan, not the donors. Her. In his face, she saw the reason her mother had filled out forms at midnight, the reason Maya had counted numbers that no one wanted her to understand, the reason dignity mattered even when money tried to rename it. She turned back to the room and placed the microphone gently on the podium. The sound was small. The meaning was not. Maya did not walk away from the ballroom like someone escaping. She walked away like someone returning to herself. The marble floor beneath her shoes no longer sounded like a path to humiliation. It sounded like an exit from a room that had finally learned her name. Behind her, the Sterling Children's Gala continued to unravel into action. Chairs scraped softly as board members gathered near Julian Pierce. Donors who had spent the first half of the evening discussing vacation homes and market trends now spoke in lowered, urgent voices about emergency oversight, independent audits, and protected scholarship accounts. The music did not return. No one asked for it. Some nights do not need music after the truth has spoken. Near the service doors, Maya reached for the tray she had set down earlier. It was still there, the champagne flutes untouched, the bubbles gone flat beneath the warm gold light. That small detail almost made her laugh, but the laugh never came. Her hands were steady now, but inside her chest something old and tired had begun to loosen. She had carried that report for 92 days in a silence that felt heavier every week. She had checked her email during lunch breaks, between bus rides, after late shifts, hoping for one reply that never came. She had wondered if she had imagined the pattern, if she had overstepped, if the people upstairs knew something she did not. That was what neglect did. It made the careful doubt themselves while the careless moved on untouched. A young server named Tasha stepped toward her, eyes shining. "Maya," she whispered, "are you all right?" Maya looked at her, then at the staff gathered behind her, cooks in white coats, bussers with towels over their shoulders, servers holding empty trays they had forgotten to put down. They looked proud. They looked scared. They looked like people who had seen one of their own step into a light that usually burned instead of warmed. "I am all right," Maya said, and for the first time that night, she believed it. Across the ballroom, Ethan Caldwell watched her from the stage. He had not followed. That mattered. Maybe someone had advised him not to. Maybe shame had finally taught him distance. Maybe he simply did not know how to approach a woman he had tried to reduce and failed to understand. Margaret Wells came instead, moving carefully through the room, her pearl necklace still at her throat, but no longer looking like decoration. It looked like weight. She stopped a few feet from Maya, not too close, as if respect required space. "Miss Brooks," she said, "your mother saved this foundation once. I think tonight, you did too." Maya felt the words strike somewhere tender. She wanted to answer with grace. She wanted to say thank you, to smooth the moment, to make it easier for the older woman whose eyes were already wet. But Maya had spent too much of her life making hard truths comfortable for others. So she told the smaller, sharper truth. "My mother did not save it so people could use it as a backdrop." Margaret lowered her gaze. "You are right. 2 words. Plain. Necessary." Maya looked past her to the children's photographs on the wall. The boy with the engineer sign was still there, holding his mother's hand. When he saw Maya looking, he lifted the sign a little higher, shy but certain. Something in Maya's face softened. That was the moment that nearly broke her. Not Ethan's apology. Not the applause. Not the documents on the screen. A child lifting a dream in a room that had almost stolen the money meant to protect it. Margaret followed her gaze and nodded slowly, as if she understood the assignment had changed. "The emergency board vote will happen tonight," she said. "The scholarship fund will be restored before morning." Maya turned back to her. "Do not restore it quietly." Margaret blinked. Maya's voice stayed calm. "Announce it publicly. Name what happened. Not because I need credit. Because children should not have to depend on secrets to keep what was promised to them." Margaret stood still, absorbing the sentence like a lesson she should have learned years earlier. Then she nodded. "Publicly," she said, "before anyone leaves this room." Only then did Maya pick up the tray. Not to serve Ethan. Not to disappear. She picked it up because her work had never been the shame. The shame had belonged to those who looked at honest work and saw something beneath them. Margaret Wells returned to the stage without music, without ceremony, without the warm introduction she had rehearsed earlier that evening. The ballroom watched her climb the steps like a woman carrying more than a microphone. Behind her, Ethan Caldwell stood slightly to the side, no longer framed at the center of the lights, no longer able to hide behind the language of generosity. Julian Pierce remained near the display table, speaking quietly with 2 board members and an outside auditor on speakerphone. Claire Donovan had already sent a statement to the press, not the kind that polished the truth until it became harmless, but the kind that left fingerprints on accountability. At the service entrance, Maya Brooks held the silver tray against her waist and listened. She had asked Margaret not to restore the fund quietly. Now the room was about to learn whether powerful people could tell the truth when it cost them something. Margaret tapped the microphone once. The small sound moved across the ceiling and came back as silence. "Before anyone leaves tonight," she said, her voice trembling only at the edges, "this foundation owes the families it serves, the donors who trusted us, and Miss Maya Brooks a clear public record." Ethan lowered his eyes. Not in performance. Not enough to be forgiven. Just enough to show that the sentence had reached him. Margaret continued. "The board has voted to freeze all pending transfers connected to Northline Civic Strategies. We are opening an independent audit immediately. The full $12 million allocated to Brooks Future Scholars will be restored before morning, with emergency protections so it cannot be redirected without full board approval and public notice." The room did not cheer. It listened harder. Real accountability rarely sounds like celebration at first. It sounds like chairs no longer moving, phones no longer scrolling, people finally understanding that a promise has weight. Margaret turned toward Maya. And we acknowledge that Miss Brooks identified this problem 92 days ago. Her report was not answered. Her concern was not respected. Tonight, instead of being heard privately, she was forced to speak publicly. The words landed heavily because they were honest. Maya felt Tasha's hand brush lightly against her elbow, a quiet sign that she was not standing alone. Across the room, the little boy with the engineer sign leaned against his mother, still watching with wide eyes. Ethan stepped toward the microphone then, but not before looking at Maya, as if asking permission without words. Maya did not nod. She did not rescue him. She simply did not stop him. He faced the room. For once, his voice had no velvet edge, no executive rhythm, no practiced warmth. I failed this foundation, he said. I failed the children whose names were used in my speeches. And I failed Miss Brooks when I dismissed her, ignored her work, and treated her position as if it measured her worth. He paused. The old Ethan would have filled that pause with strategy. This one let it hurt. The money will be returned. I will step back from board authority during the audit. And I will cooperate with every review. Then he turned from the donors to Maya. I am sorry, he said. Maya looked at him for a long moment. The ballroom seemed to lean forward, hungry for forgiveness, hungry for a clean ending, hungry for the story to become comfortable again. But Maya knew comfort was not the same as healing. She set the tray down and stepped forward just enough for her voice to carry without a microphone. Thank you for saying it, she said. Now prove it when there are no cameras. That was all. No speech. No tears for the room to consume. No graceful performance to make everyone feel innocent. Just a sentence sharp enough to live past the evening. Ethan nodded once, and this time he had no answer ready. Maya turned toward the service doors, where the staff moved aside for her not because she was leaving small, but because she was leaving whole. Behind her, Margaret began reading the new protections into the official record. Julian projected the vote on the screen. Donors signed emergency commitments. The gala that had begun as a performance of compassion ended as a public repair. And somewhere above the gold walls, above the white roses, above the names etched on plaques and programs, Denise Brooks's bridge stood a little stronger than it had before. Maya did not own the room. She did not need to. She had changed what the room was willing to see.